Welcome to People Rise Up, broadcasting on non-commercial community radio, KBOO, out of Portland, Oregon, USA, online around the world at kboo.fm. I'm your host, Andrew Geller, and we are going to kick off the new year here today with a conversation with author, physicist, and systems theorist Frtjof Capra. He is a founding director of the Center for Ecoliteracy, based in Berkeley, California, and they promote ecology and systems thinking in primary and secondary education. Frtjof will be here in Portland in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks from tomorrow, January 18th, speaking at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall as part of the Science, Technology, and Society Linus Pauling Memorial Lecture Series. Welcome to KBOO's Airwaves, Frtjof.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, I'm so pleased that you are able to be with us.
Great.
Now, you are the founder of the Center for Ecoliteracy down in Berkeley. Let's focus on, first off, what ecoliteracy is, and then we'll segue into what its importance is in terms of education. How do you define ecoliteracy?
Yeah, well, I think I have to begin talking about sustainability, which is, one of the key issues of our time, to create sustainable societies. And to do so, we can learn a lot from nature because nature's ecosystems are sustainable communities. They are communities of plants, animals, and microorganisms that have evolved over billions of years so as to maximize their sustainability. And so, naturally, to create a human community that is sustainable, we first have to know, how does nature do it? How does nature sustain life? And this knowledge is what I call ecological literacy, to understand the principles of organization of ecosystems and then to apply those to our lives.
Now, what would be some of those organizing principles in nature?
Well, for example, in an ecosystem, there is no net waste, because what is waste for one species is food for another. And so matter cycles continually through this network, which we also call the web of life. Another principle would be that the energy that fuels those ecological cycles comes from the sun. Another principle would be that from its very beginning, 3 billion years ago, life did not take over the planet by combat, but by networking. And it is obvious, I think, that those are profound principles that can and should be applied to human life.
And also, in the context of the idea of networking, it's really cooperation. There is competition in the sense that, there's only so much food for so many animals, and that's the ebb and flow of...
I mean, it's obvious that if all the nutrients are passed around from one species to the next, that is cooperation. And there is competition, but all competition takes place within a broader context of cooperation. And partnerships, there are symbiosis, partnerships, species living together, depending on one another. That is all pervasive.
Now, you wrote a book just about 10 years ago called The Web of Life,
That's right.
A new scientific understanding of living systems. If it's talking about a new understanding of living systems, can you first tell us a little bit about what it's contrasted against?
Well, what it is contrasted against is the worldview that was created by the scientific revolution in the 17th century, by Galileo, Descartes, Newton, beginning with Copernicus, and so on, which was tremendously successful, but which has now outlived its usefulness. And that is a mechanistic view of the world, in which the universe is seen as a mechanical system composed of elementary building blocks. Correspondingly, the human body, for instance, in medicine, is seen as a machine. life in society is seen as a competitive struggle for existence, as you indicated before. And all these assumptions have been fatefully challenged by recent events, and we now need a radical revision. And such a revision is the systems view of the world, or if you wish, the ecological view of the world, which sees the world ultimately as a network of inseparable patterns of relationships. And this is the key change also in our metaphors. This is something I think very interesting, that whenever we describe complex reality, we need to use metaphors. So for Newton and Descartes, the machine was the guiding metaphor of their worldview, and now the network is the guiding metaphor of our worldview.
Now, you referenced that the scientific revolution and the mechanistic sort of cold approach to the cold quantifiable approach to viewing the world was appropriate at that time and place, and it did serve its function. It's just that it's gone too far, too long.
Well, it's gone too far, and also, the world has become much more interconnected. Mm-hmm. And, everybody today knows that, global society is a network of people, a network of organizations. We have the Internet as a global, very powerful network of communications. Even molecular biologists are now recognizing that genes are not isolated strands on the DNA, but are networks, functional networks. And so there's a shift from the location of a gene to its function in a much broader network. So networks are everywhere in our public consciousness and in science. And in order to deal with networks and to deal with patterns of relationships, we need a totally different conceptual framework, because relationships cannot be measured and quantified. Relationships have to be mapped. So we have a shift from measuring to mapping, from quantity to quality.
Explain the idea a little further of the mapping of relationship versus quantifying.
Okay, well, you see, all of us who went to college or even to high school have learned that in science, what is important can be put on a scale, so to speak, can be measured, and you have quantity, you have various units of weight, of length, of time, and so on. And so classical science is completely built on this aim to quantify everything, and that began in the 17th century with Galileo, who is usually called the father of modern science. But what you do with a network of relationships, you cannot assign units of weight or length to them. You could assign maybe units of importance or significance, but what you can do, and what is very useful, is to draw a map, to say in a community of people, who is related to whom by blood relationships, who talks to whom, who plays with whom, who does business with whom. So you can draw a multidimensional map of these social relationships, and that will tell you something about the life of the community. So that's the shift from measuring to mapping.
I'm curious what you think about the biological taxonomy system that Carl Linnaeus came up with, which sort of seems to bridge the idea of quantifying, identifying individual species in this case, but also using the Latin classification system to develop patterns. And this is how we come up with, there's individual species, but then there's the genus and everything all this.
That's right. I mean, Linnaeus really hit on something, extremely useful and extremely powerful, and this is why his classification system is still used today. And there's an interesting development here that you can notice with the understanding of evolution. we have come to see these relationships in the taxonomy as part of an evolutionary tree, as part of branching relationships, and as part of a process, an ongoing process in the history of evolution. So again, there is a shift from these isolated taxonomic unities to the context, the relationships, and the process of evolution.
Now, let's begin to talk about how these principles can be incorporated into primary, secondary, and advanced educational curriculum.
Okay, well, at the Center of Ecoliteracy, which, by the way, I didn't found alone, but together with several colleagues, and what we have developed over the last 10 years is a special pedagogy which we call Education for Sustainable Living. And we have a very extensive website, which is ecoliteracy.org, where this pedagogy is explained. You see, the problem is that teaching ecological knowledge is not that simple for several reasons. First, you have to think systemically. You have to think in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns, in terms of processes. And that is a new way of thinking also in education. And teachers notice this all the way from kindergarten to college. Secondly, ecology is inherently multidisciplinary. You need to know not only biology, but you need to know also soil chemistry, atmospheric chemistry, thermodynamics, and that's just ecosystems without people. When it comes to human ecology and sustainability, we need to talk about economics, politics, design, various, social sciences. So ecology is multidisciplinary. And what we have done in our schools, and we work in primary and secondary education, is that we have designed an experiential approach. So the kids go out into a garden. They have a school garden. They cook meals. They go into a riverbed and do some creek restoration, watershed studies, and so on. And in nature, they learn the principles of ecology by getting their hands dirty, so to speak. And they learn it then as something that is the center of the curriculum. Ideally in the school, all the subjects would refer to that experience in the garden and would refer to the ecological principles.
You're listening to People Rise Up on KBOO Community Radio in Portland, Oregon. My guest this morning is Frtjof Capra. He is a physicist, systems theorist, and author of many books. We are discussing living systems and ecoliteracy. Frtjof Capra will be in Portland January 18th, speaking at 7 p.m. at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall as part of the Linus Pauling Memorial Lecture Series. And for more information, you can go to the website of the Institute for Science, Engineering, and Public Policy at www.isepp.org. The Center for Ecoliteracy has a website at www.ecoliteracy.org. So you're talking about using the garden as both a metaphor and an actual, concrete example of all these interdisciplinary aspects of learning.
As a teaching tool, really.
How young do you try and incorporate garden and ecoliteracy into curriculum? Is this first, second grade? Is it younger?
Well, from all the way from kindergarten to the end of high school. And with the younger kids, it's actually much easier because, in kindergarten, you have a single teacher who teaches all the subjects and doesn't really, categorize subjects. It's very transdisciplinary, and even in first and second grade. So that's the ideal place to start. And then, you go on. And, as the kids get older, of course, the instruction changes, the dialogue changes, the concepts become more sophisticated. And we have worked out, guidelines for curricula, through these various age groups.
And is that information that's available online? If there's teachers,
that's all available online. Yes.
Okay, so any teachers listening could take a look and go,
Absolutely.
"Wow, I could incorporate this."
Yeah, and also we are now, we have had 10 years of experience, and we are moving now into a new phase where we are organizing seminars. We will have 2 or 3 seminars a year for teachers and teams from schools where we teach this methodology.
So I was reading some of the materials that's on the Center for Ecoliteracy website. Part of it was an interview with the director of the center, Zenobia Barlow,
Right.
and she was talking about these phenomenal examples where kids were doing, I don't know if they were technically endangered species, but certainly in the microsystem of the habitat, in particular these type of shrimp were disappearing from this creek. And these kids went out and they were doing some basic restoration work, and they had tangible results within 10 years that scientists predicted wouldn't take place within 50.
Yes.
And that sort of tangible result, I'm certain, has a tremendously lasting effect on their perception of their own ability to influence outcomes.
Absolutely, and we were all extremely impressed and very moved by that because none of us had expected these results. Just very quickly, you're referring to a region north of San Francisco, Marin County, which has a number of creeks, and there's a small critter called a freshwater shrimp that was endangered and had practically disappeared. The reason was that this is farming country, and the shrimp needs young willow bushes in the riverbeds on the borders for its habitat, and the cows were trampling down the borders of the river, the banks, and destroying these willows. And so the kids had to study, first of all, the ecology and the biology of the shrimp, the geography of these creeks, and they were drawing maps, so you get math and geometry and geography and biology all into this. And then they were talking to the farmers, and then they wanted to write a letter to the mayor, and the teacher told them, well, if you want the mayor to read your letter, it had better be written very well. So they really, got very enthusiastic about writing good letters and stuff like that. So you see, the entire curriculum can be incorporated in that single idea of saving the shrimp. And it's also important to mention that the idea came from the kids themselves, not from the teacher.
And I imagine that this approach also, compared to the education I got, and probably the majority of people received in this country, much more of a team orientation and working together as opposed to the focus on you being the best and, more that competitive style.
Right. And you see, when you have a creek restoration or, a gardening project, the kids who are good in the garden are not necessarily the kids who are good in English or math. So there's a great diversity of talents that comes to the fore. These, what is nowadays called multiple intelligences, are exhibited. And, of course, everything has to be cooperative. And that is also true of our pedagogy in general, because if you want ecology as the core of the curriculum, integrating all the subjects, all the disciplines, then you had better get the teachers talk to each other and cooperate. Otherwise, it's not possible.
I wish I had something like this when I was a kid. I'm actually a 10-year-long gardener now and fairly good at it, but never...
I didn't have it either, but, I was lucky to grow up on the farm. I spent the first 10 years of my life on a farm in Austria, and I experienced all that there, and I still remember it.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes or so left here, and I want to come back to the idea of experiential learning through the garden and talk specifically about the Rethinking School Lunch program that you folks have been promoting.
Well, we began, 10 years ago, developing our pedagogy for ecology, for principles of sustainability, and we found after some research that a creek and a garden are two ecosystems that are very appropriate for children because they have the right scale. And we all remember we had magic moments either in the garden or in a riverbed in our childhood. And so then from the garden, where we taught ecology and gardening, we moved into the schools and built kitchens and taught them how to cook, not complicated dishes, but just, organic salads and small dishes of what you could harvest in the garden. And while we are doing this, the public attention focused very much on childhood obesity. And this was recognized as a tremendous danger and got a lot of publicity. And so we were able to say, look, we already have our organic salad bars in the Berkeley schools, and that was then written up nationally as the Berkeley model. And then people asked us to help, various school districts asked us to help them formulate curricula organized around gardening and food. And this is this package that is on our website, which is called Rethinking School Lunch. This is a package of about 20 essays, from theoretical ecological essays to very practical advice of how to do this in the school, how to shift to healthy food, how to raise money for it, how to manage it, and so on.
And how far has this program spread outside of your hometown, Berkeley?
Well, it has spread very far because we are being contacted by many people. We are working on curriculum with Columbia University. We are using work in conjunction with the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We have been contacted by a national association of botanical gardens headquartered in Chicago, and we have, Zenobia has a map of the United States with lots of lines of, people we collaborate with. It's beginning to look like a whole network now.
Excellent. Now, you will be here in a couple of weeks speaking about the web of life.
That's right, and I really look forward to it. I've been speaking in Portland several times in the last 10 years, and last time I was there was 2 years ago. And I will talk about education, but also more about the theory of the web of life and the metaphor of the network in science, in poetry, in spiritual traditions, and so on.
Okay, great. Is there anything that you would like to make sure the audience knows before we part?
No, I'll be happy for as many people as possible to come and look forward to discussions. I always had very stimulating discussions in Portland, and I look forward to another one.
Okay, well, I appreciate you making some time in your schedule to join us on the program this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a great pleasure.
All right, you take care.
You too.
Frtjof Capra is a physicist, systems theorist, and author of many books. He has a website of his own that is www.frtjofcapra.net. That's FRITJOF CAPRA. And as I mentioned, he is speaking here in town January 18th at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall on Web of Life, a new understanding of living systems. For more information about tickets and that series, the Linus Pauling Memorial Lecture Series, you can go online to www.isepp.org. You can also call 503-232-2300. And the Center for Ecoliteracy has a tremendous collection of resources online. You can find out more about them at www.ecoliteracy.org. And there's a whole bunch of material for lay folks, for kids, and for teachers, including copies of various curricula related to promoting ecoliteracy, both through gardening and other forms of experiential learning. If you have any comments or questions about anything you heard on this or any of my other programs, you can send email to me at kboo@riseup.net. That's RISEUP.net. You can find this and many other versions of People Rise Up online as downloadable audio by going to archive.org and searching either for Andrew Geller or People Rise Up. Thank you very much for listening to this program.